All right, so you've given us a fascinating pairing this time. Nathaniel Hawthorne's classic short story, Dr. Heidegger's Experiment, and a selection of excerpts from The Law of One material. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is an intriguing pairing.
It is. So just to kind of set the stage for anyone who maybe hasn't read Hawthorne in a while or maybe never delved into The Law of One,
Right.
Dr. Heidegger's Experiment is, at its heart, this story about four elderly friends who were given a chance to relive their youth. They drink from the fountain of youth.
Yeah.
But it's not just like a fun, adventure story. Hawthorne really makes you think about aging, regret, second chances, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's a very layered story.
Yeah, and then you have the Law of One, which is this whole other universe, right? It's
Yeah.
a channeled message,
Yeah.
supposedly from an extraterrestrial being named Ra.
A wealth of information.
It is. And it gets into reincarnation, spiritual evolution, different densities of existence, service to others versus service to self, like all these big metaphysical concepts. So the question is, what unexpected connections might we find between, a 19th century short story and a channeled message from supposedly beyond the stars?
And I think there are more than you might expect. What's fascinating to me is how both sources, in their own way, really explore this idea of transformation, of change, of evolution.
Okay, yeah. So in Dr. Heidegger's Experiment,
Mhm.
the characters are immediately drawn to the promise of youth, right? Yeah, like, who wouldn't be? But Dr. Heidegger himself, he's kind of cautious. He's like, hey, be careful what you wish for.
He issues that warning.
He does. But
Yeah.
do they listen?
Nope.
So they drink the water, they become young again, and what happens? They fall right back into their old patterns of behavior, which makes you wonder, do we ever truly learn from our mistakes?
Right, and that's where I think the Law of One offers some really interesting insights, because if you look at the idea of reincarnation, which is central to the Law of One's teachings, it suggests that we are given multiple lifetimes to work through our issues and evolve.
Oh, okay, so maybe those characters in Hawthorne's story, they're just stuck in a loop, playing out those same lessons over and over again until they finally get it right.
It's a possibility, but it begs the question, is the point to finally get it right and escape the cycle, or is the process of learning and growing itself the ultimate goal?
That's deep. And it makes me think about how Dr. Heidegger's Experiment leaves the reader kind of wondering, was the water even really magical? Or was it all in their
It
heads?
plays with that ambiguity for sure.
It does, and that connects so well with the Law of One concept of the veil, right?
Yeah.
The idea that our perception of reality is filtered through our beliefs and expectations.
Absolutely. It makes you question, how do we know what's real and what's just an illusion?
Right. And this is where it gets really trippy because Ra actually claims that our reality is a kind of training ground for spiritual evolution.
A classroom, in a sense.
Yeah. But then, if everything is filtered through our beliefs,
Yeah.
like, how do we know if we're passing the class? How do we know if we're evolving in the right direction?
That's the million-dollar question. And I don't think the Law of One necessarily offers a definitive answer, but what it does suggest is that the point might not be so much about figuring out the one true nature of reality, but rather about understanding how our beliefs shape our experiences and using that knowledge to evolve.
So we're not just talking about whether the fountain of youth is real or not in Hawthorne's story. We're talking about how our own fountains, our desires and fears, might be blinding us to a bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay, so this isn't just about those four old folks anymore. It's about all of us potentially, bumping up against those same walls, those same limitations until we figure out how to tear them down.
Precisely. And that demolition job, so to speak, might not be about becoming perfect or achieving some kind of ultimate state of enlightenment, but rather it might be about understanding the nature of these patterns, these cycles, these beliefs that we get caught in. And then maybe, just maybe, we can start to choose differently.
So even if we could magically become young again physically,
Right.
if we haven't done that inner work, we're just going to be like 20-year-olds making the same dumb mistakes as before.
It's a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which suggests that the real fountain of youth might not be about erasing wrinkles or turning back the clock, but about cultivating that childlike curiosity and openness to experience that allows us to keep learning and evolving throughout our lives, no matter our age.
Now we're getting somewhere. So it's
Yeah.
less about chasing some external fountain
Yeah.
and more about tending to that inner wellspring of growth, right?
Yeah, precisely. And that brings us to a concept that's central to the Law of One, the idea of service. Now, on the surface, this might seem a world away from Hawthorne's characters, who are so obsessed with their own pasts and their own desires. But
But I see where you're going with this.
Uh-huh.
Those characters in Dr. Heidegger's experiment, they're so focused on themselves, they're basically living examples of what not to do when it comes to service, right?
Exactly. They embody a kind of distorted service to self
No.
where it's all about grabbing what they want, even at the expense of others. And this is where the law of one provides a crucial insight. It's not that focusing on the self is inherently bad, it's the motivation behind it.
It's like the difference between, say, indulging in a delicious meal just for the pure sensory pleasure, versus like taking the time to cook a nourishing meal for someone you love and care about.
Exactly.
Same action, totally different energy.
Precisely. And that intention, that energetic alignment, is what seems to matter most when it comes to spiritual evolution, at least according to the law of one.
So those characters in Dr. Heidegger's experiment, they basically fail the service test because their motivations are all messed up.
It would appear so.
Yeah, they're stuck in this loop of self-gratification,
Mm-hmm.
and it ultimately leads to, well, more suffering.
Precisely. And this idea of being trapped in a loop, in a pattern of self-defeating behavior, that resonates with another key concept from the law of one, the illusion of time.
Oh, this is where it gets really meta. So Hawthorne, he's already playing with our perception of time in this story, giving these characters a taste of the past. But the law of one is saying that time itself might be part of that veil of illusion, right?
Exactly.
Whoa, so in higher densities, according to Ra, time isn't linear like we experience it here. It's more multifaceted. It's like, imagine having access to all your past lives' wisdom at the same time, while also holding the potential of your future selves.
It's a vast and complex concept.
Yeah, that's a lot to wrap my head around. But if time is an illusion, then, like, do our choices even matter? I mean, if I'm just going to keep reincarnating anyway, what's the point of struggling to make the right decisions now?
It's a valid question. And I think it's important to remember that even within the framework of reincarnation and the illusion of time, the law of one still emphasizes the importance of free will.
So it's not like we're just puppets on strings, even if there's a bigger cosmic plan at play.
Precisely. And we can look back at how Dr. Heidegger sets up his experiment as a kind of metaphor for this. He gives his friends the chance to drink from the fountain, but ultimately their choices determine the outcome.
They still have agency.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Correct.
So even if we're all on this grand cosmic treadmill of reincarnation, the way we run, the effort we put in, it still shapes the journey.
It does, and that ties into another fascinating concept, the collective consciousness.
Okay, now you're really getting into the good stuff.
Rand describes it as this shared pool of thoughts, emotions, experiences, all influencing our individual realities.
Whoa. So it's like we're not just creating our own individual realities, we're also co-creating this massive shared reality with everyone else.
Exactly. And I think you can see that dynamic playing out in Dr. Heidegger's experiment as well. The characters, they're not just isolated individuals messing with magic water. Their actions, their choices, they ripple outward and affect the group dynamic. They're creating a shared reality together, for better or worse.
It's like they're weaving a tapestry together, but the threads are made of, like their desires, their fears, their choices. And that raises a huge question. How much control do we really have over what we contribute to that collective tapestry? Because if our personal choices are rippling outward and affecting everyone else, then the stakes are a lot higher than just our own individual happiness, right?
Indeed. And that brings us to another point of connection between Hawthorne and the law of one, the concept of archetypes.
Ooh, okay, getting a little Jungian on us. But yeah, I see it. Those characters in Dr. Heidegger's experiment, they're like these larger-than-life figures representing like classic human flaws, vanity, greed, the pursuit of fleeting pleasures.
Precisely. And the law of one suggests that these archetypes aren't just literary devices. They exist on a deeper level, shaping our understanding of the world and even influencing the evolution of consciousness itself.
So instead of just being stock characters, they're like reflections of something fundamental to the human experience.
Yeah.
It's like Hawthorne is saying, hey, look, these patterns, these archetypes, they play out over and over again, not just in individuals, but in society as a whole.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how can we learn from these archetypes? How can we recognize these patterns in our own lives and in the world around us? And perhaps more importantly, how can we choose to break free from those patterns that no longer serve us?
Okay, that is a great question to ponder. But I think we're going to have to save that for part 2 of this deep dive, because my brain is officially full.
And it makes you wonder, what would it look like to actually break free from those patterns, to choose differently, to actually embody those higher principles that both Dr. Heidegger's experiment and the Law of One are pointing towards.
Right, because it's easy to read these stories, to get all intellectually excited about these concepts, but then, how do we actually live them?
It's the age-old question, isn't it?
It is.
How do we bridge that gap between knowledge and wisdom, between theory and practice?
Yeah, and I think maybe one way to approach that is to look at what happens when those characters in Hawthorne's story fail to make that bridge.
Okay, I like that. So what are the consequences of their choices?
Well, they end up right back where they started, don't they? They get a taste of youth, they indulge in all their old vices, and ultimately, it just leads to more suffering.
It's a cautionary tale, for sure.
Yeah. And it makes me think about something that Rad talks about in The Law of One, the idea of catalysts.
Ah, yes, catalysts.
So catalysts are basically these challenges or opportunities that are presented to us in life to help us learn and grow.
Right, they're like these cosmic nudges or sometimes even cosmic shoves that push us out of our comfort zones and force us to confront those areas where we need to evolve.
Exactly. And I think you can see how that plays out in Dr. Heidegger's experiment too. Those characters, they're confronted with their pasts, with their regrets, with their unfulfilled desires. And those confrontations are uncomfortable for sure, but they're also opportunities.
Opportunities to choose differently.
They break free from those old patterns.
But the characters in the story, they don't quite manage to do that, do they?
No. They fall back into those same habits, those same ways of thinking, and ultimately it leads them right back to where they started, which I guess is kind of the point Hawthorne's trying to make, right?
Right. And I think it ties back to what we were talking about earlier, that gap between knowledge and wisdom. Because those characters, they have the knowledge, right? They know what they did wrong in the past. They know what caused them pain. But they don't have the wisdom to apply that knowledge, to make different choices.
They're stuck in those old patterns.
Yeah. Precisely. And that brings us to another important concept that both Dr. Heidegger's experiment and the Law of One touch on, the idea of responsibility.
Oh, okay. So not just recognizing the patterns, but taking ownership of our choices.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we have agency, that we have free will, and that our choices have consequences. But, and this is a crucial point, the Law of One emphasizes the importance of accepting responsibility without drowning in self-judgment.
So it's like, okay, I messed up, I learned from it. Now, how can I move forward in a more positive direction? It's about taking ownership without beating ourselves up.
Beautifully put. It's about finding that balance between acknowledging our mistakes and extending compassion to ourselves. Because if we get stuck in self-blame, if we're constantly berating ourselves for our past choices, then we're actually less likely to make positive changes in the present.
It's like we're just perpetuating that cycle of negativity.
Exactly. And I think that's something that those characters in Hawthorne's story could have really benefited from.
A little self-compassion.
A little bit of grace. Because if they had been able to forgive themselves for their past mistakes, to see those mistakes as opportunities for learning rather than as sources of shame, then maybe, just maybe, they would have been able to break free from those self-defeating patterns.
So forgiveness is key.
It's essential. And the Law of One goes even deeper with this concept. Because Ross suggests that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger or resentment towards others, it's also about forgiving ourselves.
So it's not just about reconciling with the people we've wronged, it's about reconciling with ourselves.
Exactly. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. They can understand the importance of forgiving others, but they struggle to extend that same forgiveness to themselves.
Well, we can be so hard on ourselves.
We can be our own worst critics.
Absolutely. But the Law of One is saying that, to truly move forward on the path of spiritual evolution, we have to learn to forgive ourselves, to release those old wounds, those old patterns of guilt and self-blame.
It's about recognizing that we are all works in progress, that we are all constantly learning and evolving.
And that it's okay to make mistakes.
As long as we learn from them.
Right. And that brings us back to the idea of the journey itself being the destination.
Ah, yes. That beautiful paradox.
It is. Because in Dr. Heidegger's experiment, those characters are so focused on reaching a specific outcome, regaining their youth, that they completely miss out on the beauty and the richness of the present moment.
They're so busy trying to get somewhere that they forget to appreciate where they are.
Exactly. And the Law of One, with its emphasis on spiritual evolution as an ongoing process, is saying that there's no finish line, there's no point at which we've arrived. The journey itself is the destination, and each moment is an opportunity for learning, growth, and expansion.
It's a profound shift in perspective, isn't it? to move from a goal-oriented mindset to a process-oriented one.
It is. And it makes me think about how we perceive time. Because if we cling to that idea of time as linear and fixed, then we miss out on the richness and the multidimensionality of the present moment.
We get caught up in regrets about the past and anxieties about the future, forgetting that the only true reality is the now.
Which makes me wonder, if we could somehow shift our perception of time, would we be able to access that fourth density level of awareness that Rod talks about? Would we be able to experience that sense of interconnectedness and unity more fully?
Now, that is a fascinating question, and it suggests that maybe the key to unlocking those higher levels of awareness isn't about finding some magical elixir or secret technology,
Right.
but rather it might be about cultivating a different way of perceiving reality, a shift in consciousness that allows us to experience the world in a more interconnected and holistic way.
So it's not about escaping time or transcending the physical world, but rather about embracing the present moment in all its fullness and recognizing the interconnectedness of all things within that present moment.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the concept of love, which is the unifying force that permeates all of creation. The more we can cultivate love and compassion in our hearts, the more we'll be able to see the world through the lens of unity and interconnectedness.
It's like love is the key that unlocks the door to higher consciousness. The more we love, the more we see the world as a reflection of that love,
Yeah.
and the more we experience that interconnectedness of all things.
Beautifully put. It really is. And it makes you think about, the choices that we're making right now in this moment, how those choices are shaping not only our own individual realities, but also contributing to that collective tapestry that we were talking about earlier.
Right. It's like we each have our own little loom, weaving away, but all those threads, they're all interconnected. They're all part of this bigger picture.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating concept from the Law of One that I think really helps to illuminate this idea of interconnectedness. It's the concept of densities.
Okay, densities now. This is where things start to get really mind-bending for me.
It is a complex concept, but essentially, Ra describes these densities as different levels of spiritual evolution, each with its own unique set of challenges and opportunities.
So it's like a cosmic ladder. We're all climbing, trying to reach higher and higher levels of awareness and understanding.
In a way, yes, but it's not quite as linear as that. I think a better analogy might be a spiral. We're all moving upwards, but we're also circling back around to those same fundamental lessons over and over again each time, with a slightly deeper understanding, a broader perspective.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about reaching some final destination, some ultimate state of enlightenment,
Right.
but rather about embracing the journey itself, the continuous process of growth and expansion.
Exactly, and Ra suggests that Earth is currently in a transition period, moving from third density to fourth density.
Okay, so third density, that's where we are now, right? Like this realm of duality where we're constantly grappling with those opposing forces of light and darkness, love and fear.
Precisely, and Ra describes fourth density as a realm of greater awareness and compassion, where the veil between the conscious and unconscious mind becomes thinner, and the interconnectedness of all beings is more readily apparent. Love and understanding become the dominant forces.
That sounds pretty amazing, but if Earth is moving towards this higher density, why does it often feel like things are getting worse, like we're more divided than ever?
That's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people are struggling with right now. Ross suggests that this transition period is a time of intensification where both positive and negative polarities are amplified. It's like those opposing forces are being brought to the surface so that we can see them more clearly and make a conscious choice about which path we want to align with.
It's like a cosmic sorting hat. We're being challenged to decide whether we want to perpetuate the patterns of separation and fear or embrace the principles of love and unity.
Exactly, and that brings us back to that fundamental principle of free will, even amidst this grand cosmic shift. Our individual choices still matter. We have the power to choose how we respond to the challenges of this time and to contribute to the creation of a world that reflects our highest aspirations.
It's both empowering and daunting at the same time, isn't it? Like, we have this incredible responsibility to choose wisely, to make choices that not only benefit ourselves, but also contribute to the well-being of the collective.
It is a huge responsibility, but it's also an incredible opportunity, a chance to participate in the unfolding of something truly magnificent. A world where love, compassion, and understanding reign supreme.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring it back to you, dear listener. What are you being called to choose in this moment of transition and intensification? Are you clinging to the patterns of separation and fear, or are you ready to embrace the principles of love and unity?
Remember, the journey of spiritual evolution is not about achieving some distant goal, but about the choices we make in each present moment. Every thought, every emotion, every action is a brushstroke on the canvas of reality. What kind of masterpiece are you creating?
It's time to step into our roles as conscious co-creators, to recognize the power we have to shape our own realities and to contribute to the evolution of consciousness itself. Let's choose wisely. Let's choose love.